amicable, open, does not hit you as hard as a US regulator can, and we at times take them for granted. And excuse my saying so, because I have been a regulator in my previous life, so I may be having a soft corner for them. But the fact remains that we, and I think it came out very clearly in the earlier session, that we always try to cut corners. And I'm not talking of corporates. I don't know of a single CEO who will say, kar lo yaar. Even if he feels in his heart, kar lo yaar. I've been working for 20 years outside of Reserve Bank. No CEO could ever look into my and say, Rajiv, manage it. Yaar. No. If it has to be done, it has to be done. So coming back to the point which you had raised, that yes, as far as banking and finance is concerned, it is more highly regulated, and for right reasons, because it has got public good and public funds involved, and it's very important for the regulator to ensure that the public money is safe. Today you are talking of Indian economy because somewhere no bank has failed in the last 3 decades. The kind of panic you can have in the whole economy if you know that the money which I have put in a bank will not come back. If you are not sure that what you're putting on the stock, and you have been in SEBI yourself, is not safe. I think whenever there is a involvement of a large population or people's savings or anything, for example, pharmaceutical also, they have to be very stringent, pains for the people who are non-compliant, because they are playing with the health and life of people. Now, the point, again, I'm delving into a little broader piece, I think compliance is something which is fait accompli for a person who's in the righteous person. The challenge we have is, that is the gap which we find, and I'm getting a little philosophical, that there is a mismatch between the nation's compliance standards, the company's compliance standards, and the individual's compliance standards. And all of them are not in sync. That's why you have the stress and the tension, where I say that regulator is bad, the people who are implementing what they are. There is a challenge to the nation's compliance standard also. If the nation is compliant, I remember when I was younger days, first time when I went to Singapore in 80s, he said, don't throw your chewing gum. We couldn't afford one actually that time. But they told us, if you throw your chewing gum there, you can be arrested. What is a chewing gum? What will it create? But that was the culture which was created of a country, which came down to the corporates and then percolated down to the management and then to every individual. I think that mismatch continues in the system till that is not taken care of in some degree. I'm not saying that it can happen. Even in LA, when there was a power breakdown, you saw all those shops where they were. The human mind is the same. If you get an opportunity where no one is looking at you, but on the other hand, I remember I was working in Canada, when I was studying in Canada, when we had gone, this Karwa Chauth we have. So my poor little wife wanted to see the moon, which she could not see, and she couldn't have drink. So this water. So this friend of mine said, let's go in the field, in the sense outside the city. And we are going there, it was, just snow, and then no moon. And then there comes a red light, and he stops. I said, yeah, 12 o'clock at night, why are you stopping? You can't see anything coming, why a car? He says, no, rule is a rule. If the light is red, I don't know why they have put a light here in middle of nowhere and at 12 o'clock at night. So that becomes the culture. So I'm of the firm belief that all the state, the regulator and the individual has to be aligned and build up a culture where breaking the law is a negative thing. Here we have reached a stage where usne wo law break kiya, to he's the biggest manufacturer of petroleum in this country. Is that something to talk about? Or something to feel bad about or proud about? That is the culture of an organization. I think I've got a little philosophical, but I think I'm passionate about being compliant.
That's great. Now, sir, actually I have a question for all three of you, Shalini, Shabnam, Pashupati. It's, you're not from the financial sector, but it's a very abstract word, culture, but it's probably one of the most fundamentally important issues in a company, how do you define, how do you inculcate, how do you bring about good culture in a company, compliant culture? People want to do the right thing. What are how do you, is it just incentives and disincentives, or is there something more?
I first want to just add something that you said. While there is, I agree that there is alignment that you need to create. I've seen a very positive move in the last at least a decade that I have been involved with very, very large organizations. KPMG, Chevron, Texaco, Ambit, I've worked with them. Financial services, because that's where I've come from. I've seen a trend, which is a very positive trend. Earlier, when we started our careers, there were policies, regulations, laws which were made, and they were handed out to you to say, this is what it is, you need to follow them. There is a change. There is a change towards co-creation, and that's a very important step which is in the right direction. Now, you do have regulators, when they're thinking of a certain trend, a certain law, a certain change, they do put it up on your websites. They do want to look at feedback which comes, so that they can formulate something which works for both sides, which then is, there'll be more ownership. Similarly, I have seen that within organizations. We've done it within organizations. Whenever we would have policies, even compliance-related policies that we would have to inculcate and put together in our organizations, we would form groups of employees and we would take their feedback in it. So it's very important. So co-creation is one piece which truly helps in not just alignment, but also in compliance. The second area that I feel works very well is if there is the systems and processes that support it. So while you have one piece, which is co-creation, the second piece is systems and processes, and these can be sometimes very simple and very good. I will share 2 examples. I always feel that it helps when you share example. When I was working with Chevron Texaco, one of the biggest things that could ever happen which could stop the business was if ever there was an oil spill that happened, or if there was any environment-related security breach. As a culture, to establish that this became part and parcel of our everyday thinking, any meeting that started, whether that meeting was between 2 individuals or whether it was a meeting between 10 people sitting together, it always started with a security tip. Only thing that you had to say was one small little piece that you had to share to say today's security tip is going to be this. So this is what I experienced today. Over a period of time, it becomes such a large, it just becomes ingrained inherently. Another organization, I worked with KPMG. I headed their human resources for a very long period of time. It is again where you have to have your independence that you need to keep. You are working with a client. The client is going to pay you. You're going to be auditing them. But at the same time, you need to keep your independence in place. We put in a system which was then taken all over the globe. It became a little difficult because when you send out presentations, nobody looks at it, nobody reads them, they're boring. You have to find interesting ways of doing things. So what we did was, once a quarter, we started a game. So it was a game that was played. So there would be a set of survey that would come out with about 10 questions once a quarter, and you had to respond to say what would your response be, and whether you were in a meeting, wherever you were, the minute you went onto your computer, you switched on your computer, it wouldn't go till you had completed that survey. It took less than 5 minutes, you did that, there was a score that came, that score would then be accumulated over a year. At the end of the year, you would get to say, how did you rank in it? And people that ranked very low on the score were actually trained in their thinking to say there's something which is disconnected. And if it still didn't improve, there was a separation that happened. So that's how you build cultures. You put in systems, processes that help you then to ensure that it happens. Before I close, I want to make one last point. You can put in systems and processes, but until and unless you leave the onus of working on that with the individual, it ain't going to work. And that you can only do through trust. you have to inculcate that trust with the individual to say, once we have done what we had to do, once we have done, our values are in place, we have ensured that they've been communicated right, we've ensured that we have provided the requisite training that is required to do it, we've provided the deterrence that is there to say, in case you err, these are the consequences of that. Once you've put all that, leave it to the individual, inculcate that trust. The ownership and the compliance by choice will come automatically.
I think I slightly disagree with the idea. Like, I believe in the goodness of all individuals and that a mini God resides in individuals. But I come from Delhi and I see a lot of things happening. In fact, my offices are located in one of the biggest central government complex. So irrespective of the individual, so I've seen that where laws and enforcement are working, a negative individual or such or whatever, or like, I would not like to brand anybody as like white and black, whatever, because as most of us have experienced, same individuals who are different, behave differently in Bombay, in Delhi, behave differently in Singapore and Sweden and other places. But I personally think that enforcement and companies, businesses, whether financial sector or otherwise, have to have some non-negotiables. And I've seen that industries like Sun Edison or others, where so the tone from the top is non-negotiable. If there's no tone from the top, I think the best compliance practices and systems developed by the most forward-thinking consultant group or individuals or the United Nations will not work. So the tone from the top is non-negotiable, but there has to be multiple other non-negotiables. Once we create an environment where people can see visibly, so there has to be also an entire system of sanctions and rewards. So if some wrongdoing has happened, maybe not punishing the individual, but taking cognizance of what went wrong, where it went wrong. We work with a lot of public sector organizations, and they're always complaining that they are inundated by too many rules, regulations, that they're also very highly compliant, but at the same time, most of them report to secretaries and ministers, and we know how those systems work. So I think some kind of hand-holding, and where our groups of our kind do is that learning, the peer learning thing that is happening within this forum and others, and the hand-holding, because usually frauds and big cases happen when a small misstep, miscommunication, whatever, could have happened in one particular scenario, and we spend so much energies and resources in either hiding that or deterring the entire action somewhere else, that those things happen. So I think for me personally, sanctions enforcement is important. Recognizing the good, so incentivizing good behavior, not in terms only of gifts and employee of the month, because we know those employee of the months are not the best formats for recognizing brilliance in individuals. But a clear system is important, and especially even though we are from the I'm personally from the non-financial sector, we realize that the huge number of scams that have happened within the banking industry. And I think because of the grand level, at the level the scams have happened, there has been more regulation globally that is happening, because it's only one small aspect of hosting, the accounts and all that, but there's a lot of money that moves within the country, moves across borders, which really needs to get monitored. So I think one general, and even though we pat ourselves on the back that we are very compliant, and we name, drop companies that this is the most compliant and that is the most compliant, unfortunately, in a number of national and global indicators, if you see the global indicators, we don't really fare well in a number of indexes. And when you speak to the same people, socially not, they will give you accounts of where things have gone wrong. There are some companies, of course, not everybody is in the same breath, that they take a stand, they take a value stand, they lose business, and they hold fort. And over time, but you have to have that kind of resource available to battle a system for 2 years, 5 years without profits and still go on. So I think there are a number of scenarios, and peer, peer holding of hands and sharing of experiences, both compliance and what went wrong, will really help in making the system appear better. We personally think at the Global Compact that the 2 levels at which Indian companies need to go forward is, one, a complete and thorough risk assessment of markets, of domains, of stakeholders, and having your own red flags. You might or might not be very communicative. Ideally, you should be communicative, but even if you're not, you know what you're dealing with and you know what strategies you're working on. And whistleblowing. Although the law that has come is quite watered down, but whistleblowing within the banking sector, within the pharma sector, within the infrastructure, wherever, with appropriate guidelines will definitely work and show results, as other practices have shown. So every practice will throw up its own challenges, but can be effective also.
So your question was, how do we build a culture of compliance? See, in my view, the job of building and nurturing the culture is that of the CEO. And everybody needs to develop a framework of what is the behavior that we want the rest of the organization to identify themselves with. And it's small sets of behaviors. It's not about business goals. I think a CEO and the leadership team need to think about what is the purpose of that organization. Why do they exist? Why are they in the business for? What is their purpose? Based on that, I think they have to agree on what are the set of values they want to be known for, what are the set of values that they will follow no matter what. There will be situations where certain business goals may be compromised. You may not make as much money as you intended because you have a certain value system that you would follow, and it's really only during difficult times you get tested against those filters. Obviously, when everything is going good, it's nice to have a poster with a bunch of values that everybody is following. But there will be times which every business leader has to face when you really have to use those filters and prove to the rest of your organization and that you are going to uphold your values and walk away from certain businesses and take certain decisions which may not have been the normal course of action if you didn't really care about your values. So for us, I think, for me, I really believe in shadow of the leader and the leaders, not just one leader, obviously, but the CEO. It has to start from the top, where you have to demonstrate that you are living the values, you will follow it, and it's not like you're an amazing actor where when you're talking publicly, you do a great job, and then in one-on-one and smaller conversations, you completely disregard any of what you said, and you have a bipolar sort of personality. That doesn't work really. Sooner or later, the word gets out, and you're not going to be able to nurture your culture and build a very strong culture. So for me, purpose, values, shadow of the leader becomes extremely important. Going back to the previous comment about what really gets measured, what gets nurtured again, what gets trained, I think you have to really go out of the way. It has to be done purposefully. You can't let it, culture is not like water, it'll flow wherever, and then you end up with whatever actually happens. When time goes by, I think things would have taken place where you probably have a lot of unintended consequences. So you have to, I think, as a leader, take ownership of culture. In my view, the number one job of a CEO is to develop, maintain, nurture, and manage the culture of the organization he or she runs. Everything else, all the business goals, everything, whatever commitments you've made to your shareholders and investors, everything is secondary. If you can't, as a CEO, manage and build your culture, nurture it, I think the organization is not going to deliver in a manner, in a framework, and under a value system that you need to, and they will not be accountable. Compliance becomes part of it. Integrity, compliance, all of that becomes part of that culture. It's not separate. You can't suddenly start one day and say, I'm going to start building a compliance culture. I think culture is a larger framework. Compliance is a part of it, and very important, that needs to be developed and built. Thank you.
Bala, you invest in a lot of companies, and obviously you are kind of very close to the company and supervising and measuring not just performance, but in measuring the compliance function, how you said that you don't touch companies which are below 100 for you in terms of compliance. Obviously, there must be companies where your estimate was turned out much worse than what you thought the compliance culture was. So, can you give us, without naming, obviously, one of those experiences where things didn't turn out as well and how you handle it?
Right. So actually, I've had 15 years of investing, and I think now been on the board of almost nearly about 25. Okay. So I'm just making sure you all know that I'm not referring to any company by making sure my base is very large. So I think it's again, this is a non-negotiable. We just step down, write off our investment. I think we don't try and correct a situation if the intent is wrong. I think, like I said earlier, intent is really the cornerstone for compliance. So, if I haven't had an intent issue so far, yes, I have had issues where it has been there has been non-compliance due to lack of understanding, due to interpretation, due to oversight. Of course, we have had that, but fortunately not major. So the call really for us investors is the intent intact? If it is not, move on. If it is, do something about it. If the misdemeanor is minor, if it is major, I think company law is no longer giving us any options but to step off and disappear, unless you are hauled yourself along with the company.
I won't ask you the question whether you have been hauled, but we've seen many private equity investors have been hauled up because many are actually termed as promoters in all the disclosures. So with that, I think we are running out of time, so we'll have a couple of questions before we kind of end the session and move on. So any comments, questions, please feel free to ask any of them. Don't ask me, I'm not a panelist, I'm only a moderator.
Anybody? Yes.
One question that I have, the most regulated sector as far as my knowledge goes in the financial sector is when you talk of investment at the micro level, that is basically the masses. And that is why RBI is very stringent in terms of its regulatory aspects when you compare with other investment choices. Now, but the unfortunate part in this country, if without naming, one can see, in spite of that being the most regulated sector, the major scams, the most bundling or bungling of finances happened in that sector. Now, I would like to ask the panel, the esteemed panel, how come sort of the RBI or the regulatory agency is not able to get hold of those big fishes, and then you have scams like Satyam and Sahara and all, where we are dealing with innocent, masses' money. For example, I am a common investor. I have blind faith and invest, and if my money goes for me, it's very dear. So, how does one deal with this kind of a national, I would say, complexity?
Okay, I promise not to speak, but I'll speak. Okay. No, so I think the classic problem is not of banking. The classic problem is lack of banking, which is why you have instances like Sahara, Pearl Agro. Unfortunately, I represented them. But you have investors have 5,000 rupees. They're small investors. They're small to medium-sized farmers. They have to invest 5 or 10,000 rupees. They're unbanked. 50% of India is unbanked today. Where do they put their money? Either they can put it under the pillow, they can buy a little small piece of gold, or they can give it to the Saharas of the world. So I think the real solution, long-term solution, has to be that we need to bank people. We need to get people into the mainstream. I mean, in the short term, obviously, the answer is to enforce the law against people who are kind of raising money, public deposits from the public, which is completely and very clearly illegal. And you've seen new laws which have come over the last 1.5 years. So.
Can I respond to the question? I was in charge of the Bangladesh factory, and I've seen this very closely. In Bangladesh, microfinance is managed so well, I think India can learn. Small compared to India, which is far more a nascent country, a new country, with that level of education level is far below than India. If they can do it successfully, I've seen this very closely with their own eyes. They went into their telecom. Grameen Bank has got on the largest telecom, the mobile network in Bangladesh. Now, if they can do, why can't we do it in India? That's what it is possible.
So to your point about, I think, we have, I must have evaluated at least 20 companies, and here's what my take is. I think RBI has done an excellent job of actually putting guidelines in line. Your question was related to RBI, so I'm just directly answering that. Absolutely, but a little, here's the history, right? We have moved from a zamindari system of money lending and at appropriative prices because of the fact that there is a lot of underbanking. There's also the reality that we moved from that to an urban phenomena called chit funds, which was also the issue. So I think what we have is a very deep history that Bangladesh does not have. But we also have had to move with the time. So if you look today, I mean, if you look at some of the stellar companies that have come up, which is Shriram Transport, we have, for every bad example, I think there are at least 20, 30 extremely good examples, if not more. So I think again, it's not the formal sector, both in microfinance, NBFCs, etc., are very well regulated and very well run. So I would only say that the one that, like the Sahara example, is essentially nobody even knows today where he's got the money from. We are saying retail, but do we know for sure it's retail? So it's the unknowable which is the issue in this sector as to what is the source of money, which again, by the way, last year has been rectified, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
I would like to add. So over my 30 years of work experience, I've worked with oil and gas, then with media, then consulting, and then financial services. There is one thing that stands out for me in financial services, and which is it employs the topmost talent across the globe. If you look at it, it'll pick up the best that are there. So the brains, the real brain, they just pick that up. Second thing, what they do and deal with is just money. Their input is money, their output is money. Their product is money, their sales is money. It's pure money. The kind of conversations that I have had, which last forever, around compensation, around bonuses, around earnings, is unparalleled in any other industry. Other industry can't even think on those kinds of numbers. You only experience it when you're part of that. So I would say that one reason, that's not the only reason, but one of the reasons where there are scams that happen and there are huge issues that have happened in the financial services is excessive greed. It is greed that makes individuals and then clusters of individuals and then as a culture and then as an organization become into that self-fulfilling cycle, which then becomes very difficult to come out of.
I just want to add, I think RBI heard what you said, which is why 7 out of the 10 small bank licenses they gave last month were microfinance institutions.
I would like to clarify. See, first and the foremost is that money is the most vulnerable thing for greed also. One. Second, the regulator has its remit to a particular level. We have to understand. But for some good reason, whether it is SEBI, whether it is IRDA, whether it is Reserve Bank, they have taken or dawned upon themselves a role larger than theirs. In case of Sahara, I can share this, is in public domain. Sahara came under the residual banking activities. If you look at the Banking Regulation Act, Section 45 was introduced in it to oversee the NBFCs. Within NBFCs, this animal was kept as residual. And it was kept residual because of the fact that there was a strong lobby consistent of peerlesses of the world and others we didn't want to do it. Now, they could not contain Sahara, and the Sahara case has been going from Reddy time, where Sahara said return the money and he got 4-5 years respite. This particular case of Sahara is not an RBI issue. What smartly he did was that he found a crack between the Companies Act and the SEBI regulations and issued those bonds which were not coming under the purview of SEBI, and the Companies Act was silent on it, and the gullible investor. That's most important. Here the investor feels, in the financial sector it says that if you are a gullible investor or you are a small time investor, I'll protect your rights. But if you are knowledgeable and by knowledge you are trying to invest in a high risk instrument where you have the greed to get higher returns, then God be with you. So that is something which, all of us are aware of it, is an important to understand. And to say scams, I think we have the benefit of the media of stamping. Like yesterday only I was thinking, Bank of Baroda, some 6,000 crore scam. Now, I'm sure there's some irregularity in it, but somebody has remitted money to import something, and somebody has got the money back, he's imported something. There would be some element to it, but then you glorify it and say it is a scam. After 91, I don't think any scam has happened in the financial sector in India. Minor blips keep on happening. And that is why, because the compliance is the cornerstone for most of the regulators. And they hit it hard. SEBI, I know, can be quite ruthless at times if they want to.
I don't know if you have any further time, but...
No, unfortunately, we...
Okay, one quick, short question,
Okay.
comment.
Sir, my name is Gaurav Pingle. I am Assistant Editor at Tax Sutra, Law Student India. So I want to ask is, so the Companies Act, which was revamped in 2013, the discussion was going for minimum around 10-15 years. And after that we get this kind of legislation. The listing regulations which have been notified last month were going on for around 2 years as far as I understand. So then after that we get a different kind of regulation which is something which is beyond a listing agreement, the provisions. Means what I mean to say that the ambiguity has increased, and I'm saying that nobody is resistant about compliance, but I'm saying the ambiguity is increasing. So why isn't from the regulator's perspective there is any action with respect to so that we as professionals are not in a soup with respect to compliance?
You're not in a soup, you're in business. Rajiv, you want to comment?
Well, I just